I feel like we also should just note that libraries are like such a great example, right, of something that can't be quantified, but really makes a community special and has such an enormous impact on people's lives. But there's no like dollar sign or percentage return at the end. So just wanted to make that point in case you want to fit that in there somewhere, Emily. Yay for libraries.
Thank you. Yay for libraries.
Yay for libraries.
You're listening to Overdoing It, the Rhode Island Library podcast. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Overdoing It, where our team of library workers dish about their latest reads, views, and passions alongside fascinating conversations with local luminaries. I am your host, Emily Goodman of the Office of Library and Information Services. My pronouns are she, her. Let's dive in and discover who our guests are today.
Hi, my name is Dominique. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Associate Director of Community Infrastructure with Central Providence Unidos, and I work at One Neighborhood Builders.
And hi, I'm Andy Posner. I'm the founder and CEO of Capital Good Fund. We are a Providence-based nonprofit that offers small dollar loans and financial coaching to low-income families throughout Rhode Island and actually across the country.
And I'm Jessica David. I'm the co-founder and president of Local Return, which is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to building community wealth in Rhode Island neighborhoods, and also co-founder of Rhode Island's first community investment fund.
A little bit later in the show, we'll talk to Dominique, Andy, and Jessica about all of the things that they're doing here in Rhode Island. But before we do that, we'll get started as we always do with what are you reading? So is anybody reading anything they're really jazzed about right now?
Yes, I'm actually reading You Didn't Hear This From Me by Kelsey McKinnon, who used to be the host of Normal Gossip. And it's a really interesting book full of stories about, and history about gossip and how it has been used to actually, build power and, how it often gets a pretty bad reputation.
I just finished reading James by Percival Everett, which, I'm a huge Mark Twain fan. And actually, I read the biography of Mark Twain recently, which got me interested in rereading Huckleberry Finn. And so James envisions the story of Huckleberry Finn from the vantage point of Jim, the runaway slave. And it puts you right back in that universe. But Mark Twain never really was able, obviously, for understandable reasons, couldn't really understand the perspective of Black Americans in the 1800s. And it just fills out the rest of the story. And I thought it was an absolute masterpiece.
I am a multiple books at a time person, so I just finished this morning The Parable of the Sower. It is amazing. I mean, the story, the writing, and I actually listened to it on audiobook, and the narrator was incredible. So highly recommend. But also, yeah, it was tough. I'm also reading. Oh gosh, I'm gonna get the name wrong, but it's something like The History of the American Nations by Colin Woodard, which is super fascinating about, he claims these 11 nations within North America, and about the history. And I'm reading The Financial Activist Playbook by Jasmine Rashid. I just started that, but Local Return is doing a book discussion next month about that.
Cool. Is the 11 Nations book, that person is centered at Salve? Is that correct?
Oh my gosh, I don't know.
Because I learned about this fairly recently, and I want to say
Ah,
based in the Pell Center at Salve.
wow, that'd be amazing. Yeah, you're right. Oh, it looks like 2021 he was a visiting senior fellow
Okay.
at the Pell Center. Oh, where he is now founder and director of the Nationhood Lab. This is according to Wikipedia,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
we
yeah,
should
yeah.
not we should fact check this.
On his website, it does say he's currently the director of Nationhood Lab at the Pell Center for International Relations and Public Affairs at Salve Regina University. So he's
Oh,
somewhat local. I don't
amazing.
know if he lives here or if he's working remotely or something from somewhere else. But yeah, it's a nice, cool local connection to that. And I was really fascinated with the idea of the nations. And I personally, when I was reading through them, I was like, oh, I'm definitely a Yankee Hood person. Yeah. Are you finding yourself like
Oh,
connected to any particular one?
oh, totally. I mean, I grew up here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely Yankee dumb all the way. Andy, I would be super interested if you've read it or read it, and as someone who has moved a few times and been in different places in the country, how you perceive it. We'll add that to your list.
Yes, my growing reading list.
Emily, maybe you can get him on the podcast next.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good. What a good idea. I'm going to write that one down so I don't forget. Especially because we work very closely with the Center for the Book, which is also housed within the Health
Yeah.
Center.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this book that I'm reading is several years old at this point, but it's really fascinating to read it at this time and think about what he was writing and where we are in this moment and how, I mean, you can just see direct lines. It's disturbing, but really illuminating too, I thought.
Yeah. So, Andy, you haven't, I'm assuming you haven't read anything about these sort of nationhoods, but like Jessica was saying, do you feel like a distinct cultural difference between Rhode Island, where you were at one time, and now living in California?
I mean, look, in this, they're both blue states, and you
That's
can
fair.
feel that, right? I think there are obviously other differences, but sort of the political climate, the support, the general support for immigrants, that there's less of a culture of fear and persecution. I mean, at the same time, as we're recording this, the Marines are in Los Angeles, and the whole city is kind of, I mean, it's a Latino city, and it's very much on lockdown. But so it's sort of an odd time. But yeah, I think that culturally there's some differences. You know, Rhode Islanders are less laid back than, like, New Englanders in general are less laid back than Californians. But in terms of values, I would say that it feels very similar.
Mm. So I am currently reading, I'm about two-thirds of the way through this book called The Light Eaters by Zoe Schlanger. She's a journalist that got really into plant biology as it was happening sort of in the mid 2000s or 2010s or so. The subtitle of it is How the Unseen World of Plant Intelligence Offers a New Understanding of Life on Earth. And it's sort of about plant intelligence. And I'll put that in quotes for our listeners because there's a hot debate about what is intelligence and how do we determine whether plants are doing things with intention or and knowingly. They don't really have a brain as we think about brains, but really fascinating to think about the ways that plants adjust how they exist in the world, what chemicals they put out, whether they use electricity to communicate or scent, hormones, and chemicals like in the air, and how they communicate again in quotes with each other and other plants. And it's been really interesting. I've heard tidbits about this kind of stuff through the years, but getting it all captured in this way and by a journalist feels like it's sort of a meta-analysis of all of this information that's coming out. And she's a little critical and points out where people have been critical of different areas of science, but still is really on board with a lot of this. So it's been really, really interesting to listen to, and I've been enjoying it quite a lot.
I feel like that's sort of similar to, remember what was the book that was very popular a few years ago about the trees
Yes.
and how the trees communicate, which I did read and was quite taken by. But that's as far as I've gotten into that. Science is not my strong suit.
I did see that book. I was actually last week in Oregon and I went to Powell City of Books, and it's like a whole block of a bookstore. And there was like a whole ecology section. and I felt like a kid in a candy store.
Excellent. I went there a couple years ago and was just overwhelmed by the options. Did you get anything that you're really excited about?
Um, I got an interesting book about tarot, like tarot cards, and it's called Queering the Tarot, and it's about, so much of tarot reading is around like very European, white, straight, interpretations of the cards. And so this book was really about like what are the other meanings that we can get from these cards, and how do we look at these cards, from other lenses that are not so like Eurocentric and
Do you read tarot for yourself and or for others?
I do. Just for myself and for others, but I'm very like still on the book.
Yeah,
I really admire people who can just like look at cards and be like, I know exactly what this means.
that's awesome. I always appreciate the artwork of tarot, and the rest of it is very lost on me. So I'm really enamored with the idea of being able to read them and intuit what that means. All right. Is anybody watching anything that they're really excited about or have recently watched?
I'm watching a series called The Americans, which I think is already completed. It's a little bit old, but it's about it takes place in the 80s, and it's a couple that is KGB like sleeper cell kind of a thing, and they have a normal family. They blend in, but they're also secret agents, and I mean, it's not particularly profound. It's a little bit of a distraction, which I think all of us could use these days. But it's fun. My mom is Russian and grew up in the Soviet Union. Well, she's Ukrainian, I should note. Important distinction, but she grew up in the USSR, and so it is interesting. First of all, there's a lot of Russian, and I am fluent in Russian, um, but I know enough about kind of the history and the repression and the way the KGB worked that it rings true. But it's mostly just kind of to shut my mind off before I go to sleep.
I didn't know you spoke Russian, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I should qualify that fluent is might be a stretch. It is my first language
Wow.
because my dad's American, but I was mostly when I was young, my dad was working. He was kind of telecommuting, and so I spoke Russian with my mom and grandma. I didn't even speak English until I went to like pre-K, and I still speak Russian with
Oh,
my mom. But
amazing.
it's a hard language, so I speak it very well, but I can't read and write basically at all. So
Still, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm not watching anything.
Okay.
I'm not a good TV watcher, and I don't have anything else. Sorry, I'm boring for this question.
I've been watching Lovecraft Country, which has been a really, really good watch. And like a little spookier than what I'd normally watch, but I've been really, really enjoying it.
Interesting. So is it sort of nonfiction documentary style, or is it a
No, so
fiction?
it's fiction. It's based on a book actually, but I've never read the book. But it is, yeah, no, it's like yeah, it's fiction.
Okay. Interesting. Is it a series? Is it a long series or like a
No,
light?
it's just one season. Unfortunately, I'm like getting to the end of it. I'm like, I don't know how this is all gonna wrap up in 3 episodes, but
We've got time. 3 episodes is a lot of TV. I am doing a rewatch right now of The Good Place. I'm almost done. I'm very excited because I forget how it ends. So far, I've been like, oh yeah, I remember all of these bits and pieces, but now I'm at the place where I'm like, oh, I don't. Maybe I never actually watched the end of The Good Place because I don't know what's going on. So I'm excited to sort of like re-experience that again, and I'm pretty excited. Excited. Last month I went on a solo travel for a friend's wedding to Oregon, as we were talking about Oregon, and decided that I was going to take myself out to a movie because it's something I've been telling myself I was going to do for months now here, but I have a dog and I always find an excuse not to go out. And so I went to go see the new Pixar movie Elio about this little boy who wants to be abducted by aliens, and it was so sweet and so funny, and me and one other woman in the audience were like laughing out loud. She was with children, everybody else was with children, and I was just by myself, but it was really, really lovely. So if you like Disney Pixar animation, I would highly recommend Elio.
My son is in summer camp, and they had like a field trip where they all went to the movies to see that movie, and he liked it. I mean,
Yeah.
he's 6, so his comprehension of it, is what it is, but he enjoyed it. Although it was actually funny, last night we were talking about it, and we understood that in the movie the kid was beamed up to space,
Mm-hmm.
but my son understood it that the kid chose to go into space, and I actually don't know which one it is, but
Well, I guess it's both. I think like he sets up many, many nights on the shore this like big sign in the sand that's like aliens take me, please.
okay,
And so he does choose to go willingly, but it also beams him up is how they get him onto the
got it.
ship. So
My son was very adamant about the distinction. He wasn't taken to
okay.
space; he wanted to go to space, which just sounds like is
Spoiler alert.
It's okay. That happens early on. I know. I was trying to like figure out how to explain exactly the movie to people, and I feel like I've rested on. It's a boy who wants to go get abducted by aliens. And anything else I say, I would probably spoil it. So it's good. I'm glad that your son liked it.
I actually read an article because a lot of what I've been reading these days is just kind of nonfiction or long form journalism, news, that sort of thing. And I read an article about how that movie didn't seem to do very well, and studios these days are really just leaning on like sequels and franchises
Mm-hmm.
because they're more certain money makers. And I have been thinking a lot about kind of what that says about creative arts, and it doesn't those are not particularly interesting or innovative films, but the economics of filmmaking seems to be such that playing it safe is rewarded, which is kind of unfortunate. Like if the lesson is a a creatively written script, like was it Elio,
Yeah.
doesn't make money, they'll make fewer of those films, and that's a shame.
That makes sense because when I went to see it, it was also in the theater at the same time as How to Train Your Dragon, the live action version, which I don't remember whether I've seen the original animated version or not. If I did, it wasn't a canon moment for me, as it seems to have been for a lot of other people. And I was debating between the two of which one I wanted to go see, and I'd never heard of Elio. I just saw it on the list of movies and took a shot at it. But I've heard the critique from people that the How to Train Your Dragon live action version is just shot for shot the original movie, but with people instead of animated. So it's interesting to me that so many people want to go see essentially the exact same movie, but now I would imagine less good because it can't be as intense as an animated. But maybe I'm wrong. I'm not a huge fan. Have any of you seen the How to Train Your Dragon? Are you into
I
it
haven't
now?
even heard of it, but
Neither.
I mean, ever since we had a kid 6 years ago, and then certainly after COVID, our movie going has dwindled to nothing. So
I never had much movie going, I have to say. I get, yeah, I get bored easily, but I do not enjoy like remakes or sequels, or even like when they turn books into movies. I find that very difficult. So a lot of this doesn't sound particularly entertaining to me. I do like dragons.
Well, they have a whole
Dragons are cool.
world now I think it's at Universal in Florida, one of the parks. It's a How to Train Your Dragon world. They have I don't know if it's the dragon they put in the movie or if that was fully CGI, but they have a very real looking version of the animated dragon. That really freaks me out. I don't want to see it in person. Um, but yeah, it's a big moneymaker, like Andy was saying, that sort of nostalgic
Hmm.
remake, reliving.
Yeah, I think there's also something about fantasy that is very much having a long moment, like fantasy or even if it's not necessarily the fantasy genre, but sort of super power-ish,
Mhm.
people seem to be looking for escape slash reassurance, it feels.
Yeah.
Yeah, another book I read relatively recently, which was in January, was The Hobbit, which I reread my old worn copy of it, and I never liked. I watched the first Lord of the Rings movie, and it was just battle scene after battle scene. It was awful. But the books, yeah, it's an escape, but it really puts you in that place, and it's not just about the battles and their ideas, and it's a classic. I really enjoyed rereading it. Yeah.
I tried to read that once and didn't make it through.
So many people love it. I've never read it. I watched the first Lord of the Rings movie sort of under duress. I was in a car, like a minivan with a family, my family, but we were driving up to New Hampshire, and like all of my cousins were like, let's watch the Lord of the Rings. And I was like, okay, fine. We got to our destination before the movie ended. I have never seen the end of that movie. Get me out of this van as fast as possible. And I think that maybe now as an older adult, a little bit more into fantasy, I might like it a little bit more. And so I wonder, Andy, if I should pick up The Hobbit and try reading it because people really do love it. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a wonderful book.
I should. All right, well, we're going to turn over to our main topic of questions, the reason that you're all really gathered here to talk to me today, which I'm very excited about. So we're going to talk about sort of local investment in all the ways that that shows up in all of your organizations. And so I think at first you've sort of mentioned what your organizations are, but can you each reintroduce your voices with your name and then the organization that you're representing or organizations, in your case, Jessica, and the mission of that organization. So, Jessica, since I've already picked on you, if you want to go first.
Sure. And mine is also maybe a little more confusing because there's multiple. So I am the co-founder and president of Local Return, which is a nonprofit organization with the mission of building community wealth in neighborhoods in Rhode Island that have experienced historical generational disinvestment. And we started the Local Return Diversified Community Investment Fund, which is actually Rhode Island's first sort of pooled community investment fund. And that exists under the Rhode Island Community Investment Cooperative, which is a public benefit corporation that um, acts and is governed like a cooperative, is cooperatively owned, and manages the local return DCIF. So I'm the co-founder of both organizations, and they work very closely together right now in that the fund is still very much in its infancy fundraising period.
And what would you say is the main purpose or mission and the thing that you're trying to achieve with maybe both of these organizations together?
Yeah, there's really several things, which probably wasn't smart, but it is how we did it. So our mission is around building community wealth, which we see as leading to social resilience. Like people who have wealth or communities that have wealth, neighborhoods that have wealth, are able to bounce back easier when there's a crisis. They're able to take advantage of opportunities that come up. I think of wealth as a little bit of a cushion. Obviously, it doesn't save you from everything, but it is helpful. And so, our theory of change is essentially that communities that are experiencing the kinds of disparities in social determinants of health, or I like to call them social determinants of opportunity, which Dominique works, on the ground in and can speak much more eloquently than I can about that. That really it's a wealth disparity challenge. And so how do we build ownership and investment in those neighborhoods in a way that is actually owned, controlled, and benefiting the residents and not getting extracted and going outside, or actually doing harm and taking advantage and exploiting. So, that is our long-term mission. The way we set up the fund, I think it's very much aimed at that in terms of long-term impacts, but it also provides an opportunity for any Rhode Islander to make a financial investment where they actually own part of the fund. There is obviously a community benefit that we hope will result. We'll be investing into real estate in neighborhoods that have high poverty rates. And we think there's some really great real estate opportunities that can be locally owned and decided and governed. But there's also going to be a financial return, ideally. And so this is, a way of, again, building wealth and ownership within our state. And then the last piece that I think is really a benefit of the our approach to community investment is that we are building it in a way that actual community members have decision-making power and authority over this. So this is not about someone coming in like from the top down and making decisions who doesn't live here, who doesn't, know it here. This is about building infrastructure for this kind of community investment and having it homegrown um, and really accountable to and from residents themselves. So that was a whole mouthful, but as you can see, we're doing, various pieces of things, and we were very deliberate about the way we built the fund, actually learning a ton from Andy and really owe so much to him for just the real innovation in the sector. But we tried to make very careful decisions around how we wanted this thing to go, because we felt like, well, if this is our chance, this is our chance. Let's build it the way we think it should work.
I could go next, since Jessica did kind of start talking about the social determinants. But just to take a step back, so Central Providence Unidos is a health equity zone, and I just want to make sure folks have the context of what health equity zones, or as we call them, HEZs, are. The Health Equity Zone Initiative was actually started by the Rhode Island Department of Health 10 years ago. Happy 10 years, HEZ. Really acknowledging what we all know, right, is that where you live has more of an impact on your health outcome than your annual, if that, doctor's visit. And so RIDO decided to start this initiative so that there could be place-based organizations who are in the community, who know their communities well, to work together to convene partners to look at systemic change and upstream opportunities to address the social determinants of health. And so we at Central Providence Unidos, when I say Central Providence, I'm talking about 2 zip codes in Providence, 02908 and 02909. So really, we're not trying to make up a new part of Providence, but just acknowledging, right, that we're not the east side, certainly. And, we know that there is the West End and South Providence, who both have their own distinct health equity zones. And really what's unique about our HEZ is really looking at health through economic opportunity. And so what we say is we have these 3 different pillars, right? So starting with meeting foundational needs. So how do we make sure folks have adequate, safe, affordable housing, access to health, access to the resources that they need, access to food. And then from there, we have supporting mobility drivers. So education and quality work, and, including making sure folks, as Jessica said, have the assets, have opportunities to build wealth. And then, the third is building power and capacity. So making sure that we're building and shifting power and decision making to community. And again, that we're not making top down decisions, and we're making sure folks who are most impacted by the inequities that we're seeing in Providence are part of the solutions.
Do you work much, Dominique, or does the HES work much with cooperatives and that sort of model of things? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So we, one of our policy, so in addition to kind of convening folks and doing some pilot programs, and we'll talk about one of those pilot programs today, is we actually do legislative advocacy. And one of those, one of the policy priorities that our health equity zone had determined was the Employee Ownership Act. So that helps stabilize the state's tax base and small business landscape by incentivizing the creation of worker-owned businesses. And so that was one of the legislative priorities that our executive committee, so our executive committee consists of folks that live in the community and nonprofits that represent those different North Stars I was just talking about. And they had decided that that should be one of our policy priorities. And we also work really closely with other organizations who are leading, right, that work, and bring them into our quality work working group.
Um, Capital Good Fund is a nonprofit. We're also a community development financial institution, or CDFI, which is a U.S. Treasury designation. The CDFI program was created in 1994, and it's all about steering capital to low-income communities and households through kind of innovative financial structures. We're pretty unique among CDFIs in that we focus entirely on consumer products and services. So a lot of CDFIs do small business lending, community facility finance, that kind of thing. And that's all incredibly needed and important work. Where we focus is in doing loans, financial coaching, and also solar leasing for low-income families, low to moderate income families, depending on the product. So I started the organization in 2009. We've now originated over $60 million to about 18,000 families across our different products.
Amazing.
So to give a sense of like who we serve, and also I should say our mission is to create pathways out of poverty and create a green economy through inclusive financial services. So we're interested in the intersection of social and environmental justice. So for example, we have an energy efficiency loan in Rhode Island up to $25,000, actually up to $50,000 now, for low and moderate income homeowners to remove mold and asbestos, remove knob and tube wiring, put in an efficient heat pump, insulation, that sort of thing. We also have a small dollar loan of $300 to $500 for things like rent, utilities, car repair, security deposit, small needs that like a lot of upper middle class and high income families just don't ever think about because you put it on your credit card, you draw on your savings. But for low income families who don't have access to capital for a variety of reasons, if they don't have that $500, they would otherwise need to take out a payday loan, which in Rhode Island carries an interest rate of 261%.
Wow.
Well, until the end of next year, because after 15 years of working on this, we finally got the state legislature to ban payday lending. So starting January 1, 2027, payday lenders will only be able to charge 36%, which is the usury limit for anyone else. And that may sound high, but as a lender, I can tell you that a $300 loan is very expensive to make and risky, and 36% is actually very reasonable. We charge 18%, but if you borrow $500 from us, you'll pay back $560 over 15 months. And we report to the credit bureaus, and we also offer financial coaching where we help people build a budget and figure out how to build their credit and create a savings plan and the like. And then the other product we offer is an immigration loan. So very topical. We help immigrants basically access the legal system in a way that everyone else with money can. Unfortunately, in this country, he or she who has the best lawyer often wins. And there are a lot of immigrants who have a pathway to get a green card or citizenship or asylum. Well, asylum less so these days. But we work with accredited attorneys, and we'll fund up to $20,000 for them to exercise their legal rights to improve their legal standing in this country.
That's incredible, because I know I'm sure all lawyers are very expensive, but I've been surprised to hear about how expensive it can be to hire an immigration lawyer for even small things. Just sort of getting advice, it's a big cost for people.
You definitely get what you pay for. Immigration law is incredibly complicated, and also there are fees. So the USCIS, which is the government agency that processes these applications, is self-funded through fees, and I've lost track, but it's something like $1,000 just to apply for citizenship.
Wow.
And each step you take has costs. You also need to do like biometrics, and you might need to travel to get to your home country for paperwork or have a medical exam. So it can get expensive quickly. Our average immigration loan is about $6,500. Yeah, and again, we've been doing this since 2009 in Rhode Island and now in 11 states across the country. The other product I mentioned is we do offer solar leasing for low-income homeowners, although not in Rhode Island. It's only in Georgia and Pennsylvania at the moment, so less relevant to this conversation, but just speaks to how we're looking at the intersection of these social and environmental challenges.
And I'm curious if you work at all in tandem with Rhode Island Energy that does some of those. They'll come out and look at your home or even your apartment dwelling. You don't necessarily have to own it for um, the language is escaping me. But they'll look for things like, do you need to upgrade your electrical system, or is there, efficiency in the house? Do you work at all with that program? Are you familiar with what I'm saying?
Yes. So Rhode Island Energy has a program that allows you to get an interest-free loan to finance approved measures like a heat pump or insulation, duct work, that kind of thing. And we're one of a handful of lenders that are approved to offer that. So yes, a Rhode Islander can get a loan from us up to $25,000 interest-free to make their home healthier and more affordable. We also can go up to $50,000. In that case, the customer does pay 5.99%, which is still below the cost of a mortgage. This is an unsecured loan. But we were able to get some funding from U.S. Treasury to offer that so that, if you have a more complicated situation, like if you need to have knob and tube wiring replaced or removed, which is a major fire hazard, and without that, you can't put insulation in, that's going to cost you a lot on its own. So yes, we do work with Rhode Island Energy, and also we're part of the Mass Save program in Massachusetts, which is very similar.
What I love about the Capital Good Fund and Andy's focus from the beginning is that it's really about finding financial solutions, which I think for those of us in the nonprofit sector, community work, it's really easy not to do that. It's really because it's hard. And from the very beginning, I think Andy was in many ways the first in Rhode Island that really just went at like, what is the problem and how do we solve it financially? And how do we make this work and build organizations that can sustain it? And, thinking of those organizations as community infrastructure. And we need all the other things too, right? Like with payday lending, we needed the advocacy, we need the direct services and the basic needs, we need the credit repair and, budgeting and building towards something. We also need the financial products. And that's what I really love about what Capital Good Fund does and what I find particularly inspiring about it.
Thank you. Just to build on that, I think, what's powerful about our model is that it is much less reliant on philanthropy because we do charge interest. Last year, about 40% of our expenses were covered through what's called earned income. It's still very difficult to do these loans. I mean, we're basically doing loans that other lenders won't do. And we're very exposed. So like the folks that we serve, if say a bill were passed that kicked 11 million people off Medicaid or Medicare, when that happens, that's going to disproportionately impact our borrowers and their portfolio. But the other thing that's important to note is that a loan can't solve everything, right? So traditional nonprofit models where the service is delivered free or at extremely low cost are imperative. I think we need to be very clear-eyed about which intervention is the right one. Like for example, we're not going to lend to somebody who's currently homeless because they have other needs that a loan can't solve. But to Jessica's point about being a community resource, like just as a homeless shelter can hopefully get somebody into stable housing, maybe then we can provide financial coaching as they're getting through a job training program. Then they get a job and now they need a loan for an apartment or a down payment on a car. So there's a whole continuum of services that we need in states like Rhode Island to help people across their journey. And it's also not just helping people move up the economic ladder, it's also preventing a downslide. One
Yeah.
of the most common things we see is like you'll have a moderate to middle income family have a pink slip or an illness or what have you, and now they take out a payday loan, they can't pay that, they get overdrafts, they fall behind, and next thing you know they're bankrupt, they might then fall into homelessness. So sometimes what we do is just a small loan, a small bit of financial coaching to help avoid that downward spiral and keep people in their current economic station.
Yeah, this feels very full circle, Andy, because I used to be a resident service coordinator, and we used to do a lot of rental education at Macaulay House in Providence, and a lot of that was helping folks apply to Capital Good Fund resources because they just needed that bridge, right? To like, they just needed that bridge for first last for rent, or that bridge money to get them into a more sustainable place.
I was going to say small world, but we're talking about Rhode Island, so it definitely is small world. Um, yeah, hopefully we're able to help some folks. I think it's obviously a challenging population to serve because we do borrow the money that we lend out, so we do have to maintain our portfolio health, and that's something we struggle with, is thinking about like how much risk do we take in order to reach people that really can't get capital elsewhere while still protecting our portfolio. And I mean, one of the ways that we've done that is, in particular, this was in the wake of the pandemic, where there was just a flood of need. We started raising a grant funded loan loss reserve, which basically means that someone lends us money, which we then lend out to a family. And then if that borrower defaults, we use the grant funded loan loss reserve to kind of offset that. So we don't put the capital that we raise at risk and can still take a little bit more risk on families that, because oftentimes if somebody comes to us and they can't afford the loan now, we're trying to make a guess as to whether they're going to get back to a place of stability. And that's just that's a challenge. So we ended up doing about 7,000 loans in the wake of the pandemic using that loan loss reserve model. So I think, to Jessica's point about like creative financing structures to deliver capital, this kind of work does not lend itself, sort of pun intended, to traditional capital structures. Like a bank is not going to do the type of lending we're doing because they're not able to bring in philanthropy to de-risk it.
Yeah. And I think it almost goes back to the movie conversation and the profit, because the traditional models are just the way that we've built the economy. It's about like the biggest profit and the lowest risk. And unfortunately, that return goes to the fewest people, it seems. And what I love about this kind of financial work and community investment is it's really rethinking and almost reclaiming some of those concepts like wealth and risk and return, and representing them for what they truly are. Like I think the backsliding, preventing something bad, that's a return. It's because of all the things that come after. And that's true whether it's a family and their situation. It's true if it's a neighborhood and the kind of lending that they're doing in Central Providence with businesses. Like if a business disappears, a beloved business in Olneyville Square disappears, like that has real impact for that entire neighborhood. And it's also true for like the other work that Andy's doing with the environment. If we can prevent further climate change, even if it's a little bit at a time, like that is there are returns to that. And like changing that way that people think about, oh, the return is just this financial percentage that I get in my my report every month, to a much broader understanding. And then also changing the way they think about risk, right? So it's not, yeah, there are absolutely risks to community investment, and I don't minimize that in any way. I think our offering memo has like 4 pages of risks, and it's my favorite part of the offering. But there's also, there are risk mitigation factors, because when you do the financial coaching and when you have a relationship and you're in community with people, and when they know that you're taking a chance on them, that's very different than your like faceless, Chase Bank, just, or faceless predatory lender doing something online. So I that's one of the pieces about this work that really excites me.
Yeah, and to go off of that, for our small business lending, around 75% of our businesses, this is their primary source of revenue for themselves and for their families. And so, like you're saying, Jessica, them closing isn't just, is a business closing is bad. And, this is also about their family and their, opportunities to build generational wealth.
Yeah, and keeping those businesses in our neighborhoods, so they're not replaced by mechanic chain or the Panera or the whatever I was going to say Borders, but I don't think that's in business anymore.
RIP Borders.
Yeah. Yeah, or the dollar store, or
Yeah.
don't get me started there.
Well, I think I often, when I give talks, I'll say that nothing good happens by chance. Like if you see anything, a nonprofit, a park, an after school program, an affordable housing complex, a group of people worked very hard on that for a long time to make it happen. And if we want to preserve economic opportunity and the local character of our communities, it's not going to just magically happen. Um, and I think a lot of people, like, Jessica, to your point, like, yes, if you're just looking at you want an 8% return on your investment, then this is not the place to go. And sure, you can get it, but you're going to end up in a world where, all the jobs go to
Mm.
China, and then, economic job loss ensues, and you have all the downsides there that come from that. Whereas maybe you get 4 or 5% investing in our kind of work, but the local business doesn't go away, and there is economic opportunity. And to your point as well, like, there are other returns. Like, there's a cost to society if a family falls into homelessness. There's a
Yes.
cost if somebody becomes unemployed. There's certainly a cost to pollution. um, so it requires a reframing of how people think about these issues.
Hmm.
I think also about right, the shift in maybe the less percentage that you get back as the investor, but that the thing that you're investing in is more aligned with your values, and not just, not just jobs leaving the country, or businesses leaving your community, ownership and maybe being owned by private equity, blah, um,
Ugh,
but also but
doing that.
also that maybe the type of business is more important to you, right? Like, maybe you want your money to go to food more than you do to bombs. And, this sort of helps you align your values to where your money is going, even if it means you personally, I mean, who wouldn't love 8% more than 4%, but to know that you're supporting your neighbor versus just simply getting money for who knows what.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm in my spare time, I'm in divinity school, and this is really what I'm interested in, is how money decisions and values align. And I always like to say, like, I don't blame most people for these decisions because this is the way the system is set up. Like, I think that maybe the greatest crime against our society right now is that our long-term economic and social well-being are is tied up in retirement funds that are invested into companies that have nothing to do with our communities, that we have no line of sight into, and that ultimately just benefit, are making a few people very wealthy. But our financial security depends on that because we have no other structure. And if you want to do this kind of community investing and you're sold on it, and I find that most people, when you talk to them, they do. They don't really, but they haven't thought about it because this is what's presented to them. Finance is really, and again, this is why I have so much respect for Andy. Like, it's this opaque and scary thing where the words are used to, I think, often intimidate and make people feel, oh, that's not me. I don't know what I'm doing in there. So I'm going to listen to some people who say they know what they're doing. And, innovators like Andy and others have come in and said, like, actually, no, it's not, that's not the case. Like, there are better alternatives and we can build alternatives. And they've done, and this is what I've learned, in building our fund. Like, it's not, you would think it's easy, right? Like, it should be easy to build the kind of alternatives that make more sense and benefit more people and, have long-term benefits. And it's really hard because the systems aren't set up that way. So in many ways, you are like, trying to sprint uphill. But I think it's the only option that we have at this moment, at the same time that we have to like fight for better options.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, it's the there's more friction in doing good than in not. And that's a function of just how those are choices we've made, right? Like, if you look at, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act, which has basically been overturned, what it did was it made the choice to go green easier and cheaper than the fossil fuel option. And there are ways that we can be doing that across the board, whether it's moving your money in ways that are values aligned. I mean, everywhere you turn, there's challenge. I mean, legal structuring and convincing people and getting the word out. And
Capacity of the institutions.
And even just overcoming like cultures of folks that just don't want to
Yeah.
take on debt. I mean, a lot of our businesses, this is their first ever time that they've taken that on because, as you said, like it's the financial world is seen as this very inaccessible place, and it's people don't want to take on debt because they're afraid of what may happen.
Yeah. For good reason in many cases. Yeah, I feel like that was very
Can,
negative, though.
Yeah.
We can't end there, Emily. Okay.
I
I'm
think
going to turn it positive. Can maybe each of you provide a couple of examples of your work playing out in Rhode Island? So maybe places that people don't know were helped with this kind of investment, or but they could see what are the businesses, who are the what can they see when they walk around or drive around Rhode Island of the examples of your work.
our work at Capital Good Fund doesn't have that kind of public facing thing. It's more just you would see a family that is less financially stressed, that has been able to save money, that has built its credit, that has a more comfortable home, it feels more confident about its future. But we're not building like businesses that you can go and meet and interact with. So we're still very proud of the work, of course, but it's a
Yeah.
different type. It's a less visible impact in that way.
And our work is we're just not there yet. So we're in the process of raising. Our goal is to raise 3.5 million. We've raised 200 and close to 290,000 so far. And so we haven't yet gotten to the point of making investments into the community. Can't see that impact yet. But I would point to the fact that, so far we have 26 community investors who've actually put their money where their, mouth or their home where their heart is, who've actually like signed a legal document and made an investment and are co-owners of this fund so far, which to me is pretty remarkable. The fact that we got the fund off the ground felt at the time like, the biggest accomplishment because it took a ridiculous amount of time. And then we have an investment committee of 10 people who are members of the community, and we learned a lot from the Central Providence Fund here, who are not necessarily finance or real estate experts, but are we're working together, we're learning, we're educating ourselves, we're kind of orienting ourselves to the kind of process and decision making that we want to have. How do you think about risk and return when you're not wanting to do it in the traditional ways, which are very well established? So again, those may not be really visible. You can't drive around and see them, but I definitely feel them and hear them when I'm talking with folks, and that's the stuff that keeps me excited.
Before we go to you, Dominique, I want to ask Jessica: is there a significance to 3.5 million? Is that like why did you choose that number?
I get that question a lot. There's no significance. It was sort of a magic number pulled out of the air because it felt like enough money that we could actually pilot this model and put out different investments and see what takes and what doesn't, pilot the decision making process. Uh, and it was doable to fundraise. So, fundraising, as these folks know, in Rhode Island is not easy. It's an uphill climb, but it felt like we could get there within a couple of years. We could have this pilot, prove out a concept, hopefully educate a lot of people, including ourselves, and just grow from there. So it was not a very scientifically decided upon number.
Yeah, I mean, specifically related to the loan fund, it's been really, we gave out our first loan in 2022. And so we've had the opportunity to see some of our businesses really, really grow. And, it's not always in very outwardly visible ways, right? It may just be having a little more breathing room for when life happens. But then you also have folks like Sav Hazard Cheney of Tough PVD, who has really been able to use the money from the loan fund to expand and grow her business. You have local favorites, right? Like the Family Cake, who has been able to open a distribution space. And so I think that it's been really great to see the ways that businesses have used this capital, either to just upkeep their business in ways that maybe aren't so glamorous on the outside, but make all of the difference. And so many folks don't have business credit cards, right? And so this is their first time kind of being able to make a larger business purchase.
Yeah, and we think about it sometimes. I have a co-founder who always calls it friends, family, fools money, and if you have friends and family who can make that investment either in you as a person or, in your business, that's great. But for folks who don't, they still have amazing ideas and persistence and will work really hard. And so I think of community investment as trying to just slightly like make that opportunity available to more people.
And as a final question for you, what advice do you have for people who want to be more involved in investing, whether that's financially or otherwise, if they don't necessarily have money to invest right now? But what would your advice be to those people?
Oh, this is a good question, Emily. I like this question. I would say, get connected with us at Local Return and the Community Investment Cooperative. We do a lot of, and we're really shifting to do even more educational and community building events and opportunities, recognizing I knew it was going to be a pretty steep learning curve because it's been such a steep one for me. But I am still constantly amazed at how much of that friction is there to kind of uncover and try to think about. And it's so much easier to do that in community and in conversation with other folks. So I mentioned, we're having a book discussion in August. We do a lot of those sorts of things. So come on in with us, and we try to build that movement. We're scrappy. We have no staff. We're very, eager to have volunteers, folks who have specific interests and might want to go in a specific direction. Um, we would love that. There also are some really amazing models around the country to look at. Capital Good Fund is one that grew up here in Rhode Island, and there's also some really amazing other community investment funds to be inspired by as well.
Yeah, I would say ask about alternatives to traditional investment options. For example, I remember when we set up, like in 2010, our employee retire 401k plan. We asked our retirement plan provider at the time for social impact offerings, and they looked at me like I had two heads. So we said, okay, well, bye bye, and we found another company that does offer alternatives. And when I turned 18, I inherited a little bit of money from my grandparents. And same thing, I asked the money manager that my parents use for impact investments, and he also had no, but I insisted on it. And in that case, he, for example, recommended I could buy municipal bonds, which are house like cities fund schools. And I was like, oh, that seems like an impact investment. But oftentimes we just don't ask, and we assume that there is no other option out there. There's a whole universe, everything from municipal bonds to lending to Jessica's fund or lending to Capital Good Fund, and everything in between. But you have to ask the question first, and then do your research to find the right option for you.
I don't have much to add, but I think I'll just double down on what we were talking about earlier about thinking about what you want in terms of impact and acknowledging that social impact and the impact on of your investment on your neighborhood is just as important as some of the other more traditional um, impacts we think of when we think of investing.
And I lied. One last final question. How do people find you to follow up?
People can go to capitalgoodfund.org and apply for a loan or look at ways to invest. We have call to action buttons and make it easy for you to do anything you like there.
We're at either localreturn.org or ricommunityinvestment.com. And you can also easiest thing might be to just shoot me an email. It's jessica@localreturn.org.
And we're at centralprovidenceunidos.org. And on there, we actually just re-released our roadmap for health equity and economic opportunity over the next decade. And so it's a great read and really gets into some of the actual strategies of what it looks like to build wealth, to ensure folks have healthy housing, quality education, and building power in the community.
All right. Well, we wrap up the show with a segment that we call The Last Chapter, where we talk about a library or bookish related question. And so today I thought I would ask you all about maybe a genre or an author that you've heard about, you've been a little nervous to try, but you sort of is on your very long, the end of your to read list that maybe you would, as we're having this conversation, take a risk on. What's a genre or author that you might take a risk on?
That's a tough question, Emily. Well, I will say this is a little bit sidestepping the question, but I in the past few months have read a few what I would call sort of sci-fi books, which I have never ever been interested in. I've never been into fantasy, romantasy, sci-fi, any of that. I'm pretty much a nonfiction slash romance novel person. That's my genres usually. Um, but I am finding in sci-fi that there's room to think about some of these big questions about like what do we want in the world and what might happen in the world if we don't take action or if we do take certain actions. And so I have come to appreciate in some ways, and I've been pushing myself to, whereas before I used to just kind of scroll through that on the Libby app, I've been pushing myself to try to look for more of those. Is that a fair answer?
Great, yeah.
I would say poetry. I think that that's one that I always get kind of intimidated by, and like I think I kind of just need to get over myself. And like part of me is like in the poetry section of a bookstore, and I'm like, what if I got to find the cool poetry? But and I think it's like a little different than like fiction or nonfiction, where you can be like, oh, the premise of this sounds interesting, and it's more like you just have to pick one and get into it.
You should go spend some time at a library and just pull a bunch off the shelf and read like one per book until you find the one that flows with you nicely.
That's a great tip. Good to know.
Andy's a poet.
Yes, I do write poetry. So that wouldn't be my my long list. I probably, given my Russian background, I read the Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky when I was 18, and it didn't do anything for me. I've heard that reading it at different points in your life hits differently, so that's something I would like to tackle, but it's a tough read. So,
I took that out a few months ago and I only made it in like a chapter and then it came due and I let it go. So maybe
yeah,
inspired by Andy, I'll try that again.
it's not light reading, so.
No.
Have you read much other Russian literature?
A fair amount. I mean, I read War and Peace, which is also not.
It's pretty dense.
Yeah. So not as much as perhaps you would like. I mean, granted, I can't read it in Russian. Like I can barely read. So no, my mom has a PhD in romantic literature with a particular focus on French. So I've read a lot of like Dumas and Victor Hugo. I'm a particular fan of that genre of book.
You're so interesting, Andy.
Thank you.
My author is Brandon Sanderson. He's also in the sci-fi realm. I feel like not everybody, a lot of people, when I ask them like, oh, what are you reading? What are you loving recently? Not necessarily for the podcast, but in my regular life. Brandon Sanderson comes up all the time. And so there's got to be something good to it, but I've never read it. And I don't do a lot of sci-fi. I also am sort of a romance, contemporary fiction person. Sometimes I dabble in the nonfiction in very specific areas, but I feel like that's one that eventually I'm going to have to just do it, get one and read it. So
Well, let us know.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so much for being with me and chatting with me about all of your wonderful endeavors. It's been really lovely to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for listening. If you'd like to tell us an author or genre that you would take a risk on, or just reach out to the show, send us an email at overdoingitpod@gmail.com or find us on Instagram at overdoingitpod. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help us reach more Rhode Islanders. Overdoing It is proud to be a resident partner of the Rhode Island Center for the Book and is brought to you by library staff and community members all around the Ocean State. The project has been funded in part by the Rhode Island Office of Library and Information Services. Thanks again for listening. This has been another episode of Overdoing It, the Rhode Island Library Podcast. We're overdoing it, but you're doing just fine.